Should your Sunday tournament lineups have anyone not playing in Kansas City or Atlanta? And is it time to fade the red-hot Patrick Mahomes? Find out on the Football Guys DFS Power Grid. I'm Austin Lee. This is Ryan Hester, John Lee, and Devin Knotts. And we are going to cover the main slate for FanDuel and DraftKings this week, as we always do. But first, we're going to pitch it over to John Lee to tell us, what is the landscape in Vegas telling us this week?
The landscape in Vegas is telling us, let's look at those games that you mentioned at the top of the show. San Francisco at Kansas City. Game total as of Thursday night, 55.5 points. Kansas City, red hot. 6 touchdown passes for Patrick Mahomes last week. Implied team total of 31 points. Just about every player on that team is in play this week. In tournaments and cash games, we'll certainly get through that. But San Francisco chasing that 31-point total. There's going to be a lot of throwing there for Jimmy Garoppolo and company. 24.5 implied team total. And then just dropping down a little bit, New Orleans at Atlanta. Atlanta's got a 28.3 implied team total. And New Orleans isn't far behind at 25 points. So you can go with both of those guys. And then maybe we'll talk about the Vikings and the running back situation there, because they're at home hosting the dreadful Buffalo Bills as 17-point favorites. There's going to be a lot of second-half carries for somebody. The question is whether or not Dalvin Cook is going to be healthy for that game, or maybe we plug in Latavius Murray as a gap filler for Week 3.
Yeah, 17 is a crazy spread. Oh, Ryan is flashing the UCF. Whenever he gets the chance to mention the University of Central Florida, he is all over it. Well, Ryan, I'll pitch it to you then. Let's talk some quarterbacks here. Not a whole lot of news other than we're going to get Carson Wentz back this week versus Indianapolis. And I don't think it really matters that much for fantasy, but we're watching to see whether Marcus Mariota is going to play this week. So, Ryan, tell me about the quarterbacks you like.
You have to start with Blake Bortles since you collapsed the
real quick, Devin. Does Marcus Mariota this week matter?
Okay. We'll move on.
All right, I will start with Blake Bortles. I was actually going to say he's kind of on DraftKings pricing about the cheapest I might go. If Leonard Fournette is out of the game, I like Blake Bortles even more. We saw last week that opens things up. It makes Jacksonville attempt more passes, which is obviously good for passing game volume. So Bortles is the kind of the cheapest I'd go in cash games on DraftKings. But I don't know if you have to go all the way down there. I mean, Matt Ryan is only 200 more, and I really like Matt Ryan this week a lot. That matchup is great. John just talked about why the teams are projected to score a lot of points. The defenses aren't very good. And then the answer to the Patrick Mahomes question, I mean, nobody's a bigger fan of Patrick Mahomes than I am. I wrote him up in the preseason, and I've just it's man crush status at this point. And even though he just torched the team that I've loved my entire life, and I sort of watched it with this weird conflicting emotion of like, I was on the, I thought this guy would be a top 6 quarterback in June, so I'm happy, but I'm also.
Yep, and his internet dropped out. Yeah, that's what a
I'm here.
Football will do to you.
That's how much of a disaster it is. So I'm back, but the answer to fading him is I don't think the regression is coming, but if he regresses to 3 touchdowns, okay, and it might not come this week because the opposing defense isn't very good and the game total is still super high and all of his weapons are great. The only reason I wouldn't play him, especially on DraftKings, is I just think there are guys that are 1,000 or more cheaper that I like. So that's where I'm at with Mahomes this week.
Devin, what's your take on Mahomes? Is his ownership going to be so high in tournaments that you're like, you know what, I got to try a different direction?
I'll let John answer the ownership question just because he's more of the GPP expert. I think in cash games, I don't know. Is he the most expensive or second most expensive quarterback on the board?
Aaron Rodgers is more.
Okay, I believe he's the most on FanDuel or close to it.
I think he's the most on FanDuel. Yes, he's 8,900 on FanDuel.
We're gonna get into some plays. I never like going up that much in cash. I understand it, but I mean, Kareem Hunt has to get going at some point. You would think, right? It's not a he's not going to throw 6 touchdowns simply because I don't think this game's going to be 42-37. I actually think that Kansas City has this game in control pretty easily. So he's actually a guy that I'm not taking. I like the weapons around him. I'd rather spend up on the weapons. I'd rather spend up on Tyreek Hill, for example, rather than put all my eggs in the Patrick Mahomes basket. I think Matt Ryan's the play in cash games. I think that at 5,700 on DraftKings, he's simply too cheap, and now he's running in the red zone. He's their red zone running back, apparently. With Devontae Freeman out, they don't trust Tevin Coleman, and Matt Ryan's running in the red zone, which is something that I guess helps him score touchdowns. It's weird. It's weird to say, but the other guy that I like is Drew Brees, just because I think that game's going to shoot out. So that's really the game that I'm targeting more than the Patrick Mahomes game, just because, one, you save a little bit if you want to go with Brees, and two, Mahomes can't keep this up. I know maybe he can for one more week, but it seems like every time everyone gets on a player, that player starts to have some regression. And there's no statistical analysis behind that. That's just a gut feel, but that's kind of where I'm at.
John, I want to ask you about the sort of how the ownership plays into GPPs here. But for those of you who are listening to the audio version, we're holding up Black Eyed Joe signs. This week we've got yellow for agreeing with someone's play and red when you disagree with someone's play, a pick that they're suggesting. So thanks for the feedback on the YouTube comments to help out our red-green colorblind folks. John, tell me about Patrick Mahomes. I want to hear what you think about Cam Newton a little bit here. What are the quarterbacks are you playing this week?
Yeah, it's an interesting week at the quarterback position, I think, because there are probably a half a dozen quarterbacks that everybody is going to be on. I suspect the top 6 quarterbacks, roughly Patrick Mahomes, Drew Brees, Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, Jimmy Garoppolo, and maybe Blake Bortles. Those 6 guys will probably represent about 60% of the ownership in tournaments, which is skewed very high, unusually high. And so with regards to Mahomes, Steve Buzzard released his projections today on percent rostered, and he's got him at 14.3% in his early week. I suspect that goes up by the end of the week. I think it approaches but does not reach 20%. If you ask me where I'm going to land in line with some of the previous discussion on the panel, it will definitely be lower than that. I will not be going upwards of 20% with Mahomes. I think that the other quarterbacks bring as much upside. 10 touchdowns through 2 weeks. There's some negative regression coming. You have all the reason in the world to believe that maybe it's not coming this week against that San Francisco secondary. But I think they can win this at home handily, in line with what I think Devin said. They played 2 really good offenses thus far, and I'm not sure that San Francisco fits into that really good offense category. So I think they get ahead in this game, and then they start feeding the ball on the run. So I'm going to be fading Mahomes to some degree. I'll probably have about half of what the field has. Who do I like? In GPPs, I love Cam Newton this week at 6,000. He's been running the ball a lot. The offense just flows through him. We saw what he did last week with Christian McCaffrey, something like 15 or 16 targets. So even when he's running the ball, he's throwing the ball, so to speak. Or, yes, running the ball and throwing the ball. And then Blake Bortles this week. I think that he's a great play. Going up against Tennessee, this secondary has been burned 2 weeks in a row. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the receivers I like there to stack with him. But that's kind of my global landscape of what's going on with the quarterback position this week.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Yes.
How are the Colts going to move the ball against the Eagles?
Huh.
They have the best pass. They have the best rush defense in the league, and Marlon Mack may be out. Is Andrew Luck in play?
Yes, I think so.
I mean, to me, it's at 5,600 on DraftKings.
As long as this T.Y. Hilton, excuse me, as long as this T.Y. Hilton hamstring doesn't keep him out. If Hilton doesn't play, I don't know who they're throwing to. I mean, the tight ends, but it's going to be hard to go all the way down the field, dink and dunk all the time.
Yeah, he seems too expensive on FanDuel at 74, but on DraftKings he seems too cheap for. I mean, let's go back to 2016 when he was one of the top quarterbacks in the league. So, and we saw it in week 1 where they fell behind against the Bengals. I think this could be another situation where they fall behind against the Eagles and they're just forced to throw because they're not going to be able to run against this defensive front seven. It's just simply too good.
Yeah, it pains me to say it. I agree with you 100%.
And we're going to have to record that and play it back as like a flip.
I'm going to have to get more controversial, I guess.
If he were agreeing with me, that would be the real moment of the show.
I think the only hesitation I would have there is actually just keep an eye on those injuries because his surrounding cast is pretty banged up. Hilton didn't practice on Thursday. Jack Doyle didn't practice on Thursday. Doyle is, less of a key here because they've also got Eric Ebron. But if Hilton's out, I think I'd be off that way.
They just held the Eagles held Peyton Barber to 22 yards on 16 carries and held the opposing running backs in 2017 to just 58 rushing yards, which was a league best. So this defense is as good as they were last year, and that front seven is pretty scary. So I just think if they're going to move the ball at all, they may get shut out or only score 7 points. But if they're going to move the ball, it's going to be because of luck and the receivers on the team.
Yeah, I like that as a GPP play. One guy we haven't mentioned who we know has upside is Deshaun Watson. How do people feel about Deshaun Watson for GPPs this week? I see Devin saying
what's the college football chant? Overrated.
There's been a lot of Will Fuller related Deshaun Watson hype, and the whole argument against Watson going into the year was the small sample size. So his sample size with Will Fuller is even smaller, but he averages almost 30 fantasy points a game with Will Fuller there. So something to be said for that. And I mean, the Giants defense isn't very tough. So I don't think he's this season long QB2. I don't think he's any of the things that everybody thought he would be in those 7 games last year, but worth a GPP dart.
I disagree with you that says the Giants defense isn't very tough. Eli Apple has made a significant improvement since last year. He's playing as one of the top corners in football right now, which is surprising as I was very critical of – he also went to Ohio State, so I was very critical of my fellow alumnus. And he's done a complete 180 and is playing like a first-round pick. And Janoris Jenkins is back to playing at a high level. So I think this is a tougher matchup than what – they really haven't been tested. They've played Jacksonville and Dallas, but they shut down Keelan Cole, we saw him have a big game, and we'll talk about him later. But I think it's a better defense than what we've seen.
All right, let's move on to running backs. If you want to check out our DFS content, visit footballguys.com. This week, week 3, we have all of our DraftKings content is free, so go check that out over at footballguys.com. All right, running back is where a lot of the injuries are this week and maybe some opportunities. We've got Leonard Fournette, who's probably going to play, but he's still nursing that hamstring. We mentioned Dalvin Cook, so maybe Latavius Murray plays more in this Buffalo game. We're also keeping an eye on those Philadelphia running backs. Both Jay Ajayi and Darren Sproles missed practice on Thursday, so maybe Corey Clement is in play here. Joe Mixon is definitely out. And then we mentioned Marlon Mack as well is looking iffy. John, tell me about your running back plays for the main slate week 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to be looking at home favorites, right? Especially for cash games. This is what I typically do for cash games. Try to find guys that'll be in mop-up duty in the second half. And at the top of that list right now is Kareem Hunt for the reasons we mentioned in the quarterback segment. He's only $6,000 on DraftKings this week. And, he's a guy that has a lot of ability and
Devin already flashed up the red black eye job.
Yeah.
Finish your thought, and then we'll go to Devin.
Devin was, he's had like 6 minutes without having something controversial to say. So
you guys have been agreeing with me too much. I have to spark it up a little bit.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
like that.
All right, so let me just run through these cash game running back options really quickly. So I think Kareem Hunt fits the bill at 6,000. You can look at Clement, as you've already talked about, at 4,300. There's not a whole lot to hate about him because they have no depth behind Corey Clements. And at 4,300, he's a pass-catching running back who should retrieve 3x value with very little problem. And then last week, Joe Mixon goes down. Gio Bernard's in a similar scenario. He's 5,900. Don't have any problems with him either.
Right on. So it seems like the hate on those picks was mostly the Kareem Hunt pick. I saw
Kareem
both
Hunt.
Devin and Ryan sort of saying no.
Can I go first, please?
Yeah, go for it. Lay into him.
So Kareem Hunt, do you know how many receptions he has this year?
He has one. But
He has one.
I think he has 2 targets.
He has 2 targets.
Okay.
So from a cash game standpoint, I'm fine with a GPP play. If you want to say it's a GPP play, I'm fine with it. We saw a streak of, what was it, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 games last year during the middle of the season where he just didn't break that long signature Kareem Hunt run. He's almost kind of turned into a boomer bust type running back where he goes through these stretches, and he was fine last year because he was averaging 3.5, 4 receptions a game. But if he doesn't have that floor of those receptions, I just think he's not safe enough for cash.
So, I mean, think about his salary. You're getting a discount on him. You've got the team with the highest implied team total on the entire slate that are favored by a touchdown. You and I already agree that we think this game is not going to be as close as they're saying. And there are a dozen running backs who are priced higher than him. A dozen. That's I think that's a great argument for Kareem Hunt in cash games. Let me have it, Ryan.
Yeah, I just don't like him in cash. It's the receiving game. I mean, you lay out great points, John, but I do prefer a guy that's catching the ball a little bit. I think there's other places to find value this week, and I think those are at receiver and tight end, and we'll get to those. It seems like a week to pay up for running back, or at least to stay, north of where Hunt is. I don't know. I'm not going to discount your argument. I just think the way that they're currently utilizing the player.
He can have 15 carries for 62 yards and 1 reception for 7 yards, and that's 6.9 points.
Yeah, and even if he scores a touchdown on those 15 carries, we're still not quite there. Right?
You're relying on a deep touchdown, and I don't play that way with cash.
He's really, really priced down. I mean, they're asking you to pick him. I'm not quite willing to do it yet.
They're tempting you, and the game script is tempting. Devin, tell us who you are looking for to play at running back in cash games this week.
Kenyon Drake. So Kenyon Drake's going up against Oakland, and without Khalil Mack, and Justin Ellis is now on injured reserve, who's the nose tackle there. This defensive line is shaky at best. They really haven't. We saw Phillip Lindsay have a big week last week. We saw Todd Gurley have a big week in week 1. It worries me a little bit that they're moving in Frank Gore, but I think that we're still seeing Kenyon Drake catch 3, and I believe he has 7 receptions so far this season in the 2 games. So he's a guy that he's still averaging 12.5 carries, 3.5 receptions against this defense. John Gruden has come out and said he's worried about Kenyon Drake's speed. Not that matters, but I think that this could be a big game for Kenyon Drake at 5,600, who's also priced down. The other guy that's interesting to me, he burned everybody last week, but Tevin Coleman. So Devontae Freeman's also out. This Saints team, I mean, they haven't looked like they did last season, where last season it seemed like they were a stud defense, and this year they just don't seem to have that firepower that they had. So Coleman is interesting. I think that he should have a bounce back week. He's more of a GPP play for me this week just because his ownership will be low because a lot of people were burned by him last week. But he's a guy that I'm really looking at. And then it's hard not to – if you can afford it, and we've talked about some cheaper quarterbacks, but who are we liking at the top? Because it's – we go to Saquon Barkley against Houston. I mean, we saw they should still have the same problems that they had last week against Dallas where Eli Manning had 0 time and it was just dumping it off to Barkley. J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney should have their way with Eric Flowers, who's almost funny to watch play offensive line. So Barkley could have another 10-catch game, which if you can afford him at 7,600, it's certainly a nice floor for cash games.
Ryan, would you agree with those? Do you have other guys you have your eye on this week?
Yeah, I just want to ask the guys, if I put Alvin Kamara's reception total at 7.5, who's going under?
Problem is I'd rather have Michael Thomas.
Seeing none. Yeah, I mean, sure, Thomas, there's merit for that too. But, I feel like every week on the show I talk about it, so I'm just going to keep doing it. But Atlanta has given up the most receptions to running backs 3 straight years. They just gave up 14 and 100 yards to Christian McCaffrey. There's nobody else there. I mean, all the things we've said about Kamara in the first 2 weeks still apply. Plus the Atlanta. Normally I would think a guy like Gurley has a better floor because he gets more carries at least, and probably more goal line. But just the receptions alone for Kamara, I'm doing what I can to try to get him in, and that might even include playing a receiver that's under 4,000 and a tight end that's under 3,000 if I have to.
We talked a little bit about it during the injury section. John, I see you nodding or kind of shaking your head a little bit here. We haven't talked much more about Latavius Murray. I also want to just touch on him a little bit more, but what are you shaking your head out there a little bit?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the Alvin Kamara, jamming him into cash game lineups. I'm going to go on record and say I completely disagree with that take. At 9,500 versus some of the guys we've mentioned already, Kenyon Drake, I'm fine with that. I think he's a little more of a GPP play, but I can at least get behind some of the logic there, especially in that matchup against Oakland. But, I'm not going to go back to the Kareem Hunt except for to compare the price point. He's basically giving you a $3,500 discount.
On DraftKings.
On DraftKings, yes. That's a good point to bring it up. That's 20% of your salary on one player. And last week that player he was completely efficient once again. He didn't get 100 yards. I don't know. I just can't find it.
I'm with you.
All right.
Okay, so Latavius Murray. This is one of these deals that tonight we record on Thursday nights that I can't give you the answer that I will know, but certainly check out my article. And apparently it's free this week. I didn't know that, so I'm going to have to work a little extra hard. But check out my article on Saturday. I'll give you my final take there on the running back situation in Minnesota. If Dalvin Cook is limited in practice on Friday, and check Twitter for this, if he's limited, I think Latavius Murray becomes very, very interesting in tournaments because you have to wonder whether or not they're going to run him out there in a game that they know they're going to win. I mean, 17-point favorite. We were talking on staff earlier this week. Somebody, what was it, like the last time there was a 17-point favorite in the NFL? It was a long time ago. Let's leave it at that. So this could be an ideal situation for them to get Latavius Murray, who has a nose for the end zone, right? I mean, this guy has – I think I wrote it up earlier today. He's got 20 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons, and their implied team total is second highest on the board at 28.5 points. I really like his prospects. If Dalvin Cook's in there, maybe not so much.
One
He's a must-play on FanDuel.
Yes, thank you.
Plug him in. Like,
one real quick thing is normally the way the pricing works is guys are kind of more expensive on FanDuel, right? Latavius Murray is $5,800 on DraftKings. That's the 15th priced running back. He's $5,200 on FanDuel, 39th priced running back. So even if Dalvin Cook does play, Murray's still almost worth playing on FanDuel.
I agree.
Yeah, when you look at the evaluator tool that we have that sort of compares pricing across different sites, Latavius Murray was one that popped to the top of the list as like, whoa, there's a huge disparity between the pricing on the sites on this guy.
Yeah.
Right, I have 4 guys I have to mention, so I'll rattle them quick.
Okay, rattle them off quick, and then we'll go to wide receivers.
Yeah. So the first one's Matt Breida. So the Chiefs are allowing 4.5 yards per carry this season. So I think that one theory could be that the 49ers are going to just run the ball to try and keep the high-powered offense off the field of the Chiefs and avoid getting into a shootout. So Breida looked really good last week. Going back to him again this week, I think he's going to continue to take time away from Alfred Morris, who's not much of anything.
Right.
Lamar Miller is the other guy. So Lamar Miller going up against the Giants rushing defense. The Giants have allowed 137 and 138 yards in their 2 games so far this season and are allowing 5.2 yards per attempt. So this is a situation where he's super cheap on DraftKings. He's only $5,000. So they haven't moved his price up accordingly enough for the matchup. So I think he's intriguing. Deion Lewis going against Jacksonville. I just don't see Derrick Henry playing a significant role this week, simply because the front 4 of Jacksonville is so good. So we've talked, I think we talked last week about the injuries that the Titans have on their offensive line with Taylor Lewan and Jack Conklin. I think this is a Deion Lewis week. Check down to him. He's 4,500 on DraftKings, and they may take it out wide because they're not going to be able to run it up the middle. And then the last guy that I have that I think we have to mention is Corey Clement. And I don't know if we may have already mentioned him, but going up against the Colts, this Colts run defense is not particularly good. In week 1, they allowed 5.6 yards per carry to Joe Mixon. They did hold Adrian Peterson to just 20 yards and 11 carries last week. But the Eagles have the number 1 offensive line, according to Footballguys' Matt Batanti, who does a tremendous job. So Jason Kelce is one of the best players in the NFL at any position. So I think Corey Clement filling in for Jay Ajayi. It doesn't sound like Ajayi is going to go, but he's a tremendous cash play on both DraftKings and FanDuel.
Nice. That was a good, quick rundown, and sounded like both Ryan and John sort of held up the yellow black-eyed Joe, saying they liked that Lamar Miller pick at 5,000 on DraftKings. Let's go to wide receivers. We mentioned it before. T.Y. Hilton's a guy we're watching. Maybe Devontae Parker comes back this week. It sounds like Alshon Jeffrey will miss another week. Mike Wallace is on injured reserve. So the Eagles are a bit banged up, both in the receiving core and at running back. Marquise Goodwin looks like he might be back this week, coming off of that thigh injury. And then there's a few other odds and ends, but those were the bigger ones that stood out to me. Ryan, let's pitch it over to you.
Before we do that, can we just talk about, is this where we're spending up?
Is receiver generally just where we're spending up?
We didn't like any time. I mean, I know Ryan liked Alvin Kamara. John and I didn't. John, is this where you're spending up this week?
Yeah, I've got a couple receivers here I like. My general lineup makeup is I hate tight end. We'll talk about that in a minute. I don't like tight end at all.
Why? Because George Kittle burned you?
And his price went up significantly.
He's going to burn me again this week because he's still
I like him this week.
Yeah. But
you would.
But yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to steal any thunder from Ryan, but there are 2 guys I like near.
Go ahead. You go first. Go ahead.
All right, I'll go with Michael Thomas and Julio Jones in that game. I don't know how you get away from those guys. They should be heavily used. Julio Jones, if you want to get away from the matchup because of Marshawn Lattimore, I suppose you can, but I don't think that's going to scare me away. Those are the guys I'll have and I'll be spending money on.
It sounded like Devin liked the Michael Thomas call and did not like the Julio Jones call. Was that?
I don't like the calf injury.
Oh, that Julio's dealing with?
Yeah, I don't. Julio's this guy who just I don't ever trust him. For some reason, he takes himself off the field on third downs, and he just is a guy that I don't trust when he's not 100% healthy.
Yeah, but there's 2 or 3 weeks a year where if you don't have Julio, you don't win money. I mean,
but against a healthy Marshawn Lattimore, I'm not going there.
Well,
so it sounds like Ryan. It sounds like you like the Julio call.
Marshawn Lattimore played last year, correct? So 598 in one game and 7 for 149 in another.
Did he score?
No, but he's Julio. He doesn't
He
score.
doesn't score touchdowns, so he's priced up so
But he
high.
does. He's not, though. I mean, you guys were talking about paying up. He's still
8,700 on FanDuel.
He's $1,000 cheaper than Michael Thomas on DraftKings, and I might like him more.
But on FanDuel, there's no way you can go to Julio. At 8,700, he's 300 less than Michael Thomas.
It's definitely tougher over on FanDuel with the half-point PPR.
Half-point PPR, and he doesn't score touchdowns on FanDuel.
It's a big difference.
It's a big difference. And there's no 100-yard bonus either.
Right.
So, I mean, he's going to get to 100, which is half a touchdown on DraftKings. So that's – I'll give you that context. I like him a lot more there. I mean, that's kind of where I started.
Do you like him or Tyreek Hill?
Julio.
What do you think, John?
Yeah,
Cash game,
same.
Julio.
Yeah. It sounds like Devin's on
There's
tight.
just too many. There's too many weapons in Kansas City, right? I mean, they
Sort of.
all around, and
Do they though?
Say again.
Do they?
They did more in week 2 than they did in week 1. In week 1, it was more Tyreek Hill, right?
Well, but then they shifted over to Kelsey, who Devin said was a dead man walking in fantasy, and he caught 2 touchdowns and won a bunch of people a bunch of money. So
Hold on. Let me say this. I was very impressed at the development of Patrick Mahomes because of that game. It tells me that it's not a fluke. It tells me that he's developing and checking down his routes, and he's learning to become a more efficient passer. So if anything, that's a better sign for Mahomes than I didn't think he'd be there this quickly. So that's on me, but it's very impressive what he has been able to do this quickly.
And the real argument to your Kelsey take that I wish I had thought of before it happened was he runs wide receiver routes. So eventually they're going to get the guy the ball. And that's where he made – I mean, it was in the middle of the field, but it was deep routes where he made a lot of his production last week. So anyways, back to receivers. I think just thinking of the two of the injuries you mentioned, Austin, is we need to talk about Nelson Aguilar. I mean, who else is Philadelphia going to throw the ball to? And they're getting Carson Wentz back. So it's, not to spoil the tight end section. There's one prominent tight end that we'll be talking about there, but it's Ertz and Aguilar this week, right? I mean, so 6,100 DraftKings, 6,900 or 6,600 FanDuel, where he's priced wide receiver 19. So that is a little bit better of a deal positional wise. So he's a guy that I'm looking at too for some savings from the top.
Yeah, especially with those injuries. John, what do you think about receiver?
Well, I mean, just you guys saying Ertz and Aguilar, and we've talked about Clement, and we know that Clement is a pass-catching running back. Should we have talked more about Carson Wentz in the opening section? I mean, are they going to run the ball at all based on what we're talking about? Is Wentz GPP material?
Yeah. Oh, do you think his ownership goes up because it's his first week back?
I mean, we've got him. I'm looking at Buzzard's projection.
I'm not saying it'll be high. Like, I don't imagine it'll be high at all, but like higher than maybe it ordinarily would.
It's 2.9%. And, my gut feeling is that you would say, well, Peterson brings him back slowly, right? But he may not have a choice here. They may not be able to just hand the ball off.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about multiple pass catchers, John, but we're not talking about a Hill, Kelsey, Watkins sort of Kansas City type situation. We're talking about a pretty concentrated funnel of targets here in Philly. So we're really talking 2 pass catchers. Yeah, there's a running back available, but I think Clement's appeal is more that no one else is there, so he's going to get more targets than a typical.
You guys don't like Wendell Smallwood?
I mean, he doesn't excite me. The whole Eagles reminds me a lot of New England's offense, right? In that they mix the ball around so much to players that aren't big names outside of maybe Gronk and Ertz. But that's why we like Tom Brady, and I won't put Carson Wentz in the same sentence as him. But he could very well have a touchdown to each one of the guys we're mentioning. I don't think that is out of the realm of possibility. And at 2.9% ownership, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm not. Yeah. Read my article on Saturday. I'm not sure if I'm going to go there, but it's something we're thinking about.
Let me bring up one other guy as a potential GPP play. We've talked a lot about Tyreek Hill, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones. I think they're going to have fairly high ownership at the top here. Are we overlooking big game AJ Green because he had his big game on Thursday night last week? Anybody looking to have a decent amount of ownership of him in GPPs this week? Let's look at those Black Eye Joes. Yellow for yes, red for no. Everyone's kind of like, I don't
kind of
know. It's
out.
mostly red. They're not.
Yeah,
There's better options.
I don't feel strongly either way. I do think that game could be a kind of a surprise, high-scoring game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'd be all in on one guy.
Yeah, it's not the sexy pick. All right, let's go to tight end.
You skipped me.
What? You talked about some stuff? What else do you want to say?
I have a lot of guys.
Okay, give me 3 more guys.
I'm gonna take my time. If we have to go a couple extra minutes, the viewers will be happy. So
John's got a bedtime. He's gonna turn into a pumpkin at a certain point.
That's fine.
Ugly.
It just gives me more time to talk, so that's good. All right. Since we're talking about the Eagles, why not Kamar Aiken? 3,500 on DraftKings. 70. He said what? 70% of the snaps last week.
Yeah.
This is a guy who he went 5 for 39 and filling in when Mike Wallace went out. 78% of the snaps last week. At 3,500 on DraftKings, why not? You could get a pretty nice lineup with the rest of your team. And if he has 5 for 39 again, that's already 2.5x on a 3,500 salary. All right, we've gotten rid of the cheap guy. Emmanuel Sanders once again. So going up against Tavon Young. Tavon Young allowed Tyler Boyd out of the slot to go 6 for 91 and 1. I think most people had forgotten who Tyler Boyd was when he did this. And Emmanuel Sanders has looked good. He struggled a little bit last week, but he ended up with an okay stat line of 75 yards last week. Tavon Young is a 4th-round pick out of Temple who missed last season with an ACL injury. He's recovering. So Sanders is a guy I'm looking at. Keelan Cole, we saw what he did last week, going 7 for 116 and 1 after being a bust in week 1. He's going up against Malcolm Butler, and if you remember Malcolm Butler, he was absent from the Super Bowl, and it may be because he's off to one of the worst cornerback starts in a long time. He's been targeted 17 times, allowed 257 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first 2 games. This is a perfect opportunity for Cole to once again show. We talked about Blake Bortles earlier. This is an opportunity for Cole to have a big game. Larry Fitzgerald is my 3rd guy. So Prince Amukamara, Kyle Fuller have one of the weirdest stat lines that I've seen, which is they haven't shifted sides of the field the entire season. So 100% of their snaps have been on the exact same side of the field. Every play. Bryce Callahan came into the season out of the slot playing nickel corner. He's had a lot of high expectations, but so far he's been horrible, as we saw in week 1 against Devontae Adams, where the Packers came back, and he's giving up 6 inches to Larry Fitzgerald. No one is going to have Larry Fitzgerald this week. So he's a guy that I'm really looking at. And then finally, Keenan Allen. So this is a straight GPP dart. The others I'm okay with in cash, but Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters have been absolutely dominant for the Rams, but they don't typically slide down into the slot. So Talib and Peters have allowed 37 total yards through 2 weeks. Think about that. 2 corners, 37 total yards in 2 weeks. So that's not each, that's together, which is like the most absurd stat line I've ever heard. Allen should get Nickel Roby-Coleman, who he's a good defender in his own right, but he's not at the level of Talib and Peters, and I think that the Chargers may just look to avoid throwing Talib and Peters' way and be forced to throw to Keenan Allen. So that's my wide receiver rundown.
I love it. Those are some great picks with some facts to back it up. Let's talk tight ends. I think the only tight end injury I've really got my eye on here is Jack Doyle.
Doyle rules.
Doyle rules. Excellent Tommy Boy reference.
No.
Billy Madison.
Billy Madison. That's right. Billy Madison. Sorry.
Austin, movie. Are you
What's that?
still with Movie Pass or Movie League or whatever it is?
Fantasy Movie League. If you like fantasy, but you like movies, try out Fantasy Movie League.
And he doesn't know who O'Doyle Rules is from.
Sorry, my comedies are a little bit rusty.
Shame.
I know. Shame. Stop looking at me, Schwan. All right, John, tell me about your tight ends.
Yeah, this is my least favorite position, and since Devin just did a filibuster there, I'll make this one short. It was actually really good. I agree with a lot of that. I like the
actually in there too.
I liked a lot of what you had to say, so it was worth it. but I'll shorten this up because I know Austin gets a little antsy about these things. George Kittle, 4,500. 2 weeks in a row, he's had some issues. Last week, I think he was held on 3 different occasions, and obviously that has a big impact on your output. And then he was missed on another throw by Jimmy Garoppolo last week. He should have had a much bigger week, and I think that he's still in play this week.
Do you subscribe to the theory that Marquise Goodwin helps him?
I think he probably does, yes.
I would agree with that. If Goodwin plays, I think he's a much better play than if he doesn't. I
would agree, yes. And Goodwin is probable for what it's worth. So, and then the other guy I really like this week is Zach Ertz for all the reasons we've already talked about. Everybody else, I think, are GPP fodder. Maybe at the top of my list is Evan Engram at 4,300.
I like Evan Engram.
You like Evan Engram?
Heck yes. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, tell me more. Tell me more about tight ends.
So Evan Ingram's simply too cheap. I think he's 4,300 against Houston. Some people are going to be scared off against Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger. But he gave up 123 and a touchdown against Gronkowski earlier this year. I think I read that Ingram has like a 9-inch height advantage against Mathieu, who's 5'9", I believe. So this is an opportunity for Ingram to have a Gronk-type game. Beckham doesn't look right. I saw a stat where he only had 1.6 yards of separation against the Cowboys last week, which the league average is 2.78. So something doesn't seem right there, and they used Ingram more last week. And then finally, Jared Cook. I'm going to keep going to the well because I think he's the second best receiver in Oakland. Jordy Nelson hasn't shown hardly anything. He's still too cheap going up against a team that really hasn't been that strong against tight ends. They gave up 97 passing yards in week 1 to the Titans, even after Delaney Walker went out with an injury. So for me, it's Zach Ertz and cash. I'm not even thinking about anyone else, but in GPPs, it's Cook, Kittle, and Ingram.
Ryan, do you have any other tight ends to add to this mix?
Yeah, just a couple. If
Sure.
You really need a cheap kind of dart throw guy, the 2 guys under 3,000 on DraftKings I like are Austin Hooper, just because, again, high team total correlation, caught a touchdown last week, and since Julio Jones doesn't catch touchdowns, somebody needs to. And then Ian Thomas from Carolina, really weak in the box score, but played almost every snap and ran a significant number of routes. It's not his fault. Christian McCaffrey was just open all the time against Atlanta. And Cincinnati tends to allow a lot more production in the middle of the field than they do on the perimeter. So he's a cheap punt play in a game I think I alluded to earlier that I might turn into a bit of a surprise high-scoring game.
What are we doing with Will Dissly?
Nothing.
Why?
Because I just mentioned 2 guys I like better.
He's 3,300 on DraftKings, and he's 4,600, almost bare minimum on FanDuel. Who else is Russell Wilson going to throw to?
He's going to throw it to himself.
I mean,
those teams might run 30 plays each in that game. That's going to be the slowest game ever, except for Oakland and Miami.
Evan Ingram had 7 for 67 and a touchdown. I think there's magic in –
Did you just compare Will Dissly to Evan Engram?
He's shown more than Ian Thomas has. Ian Thomas has shown nothing.
He's only played one game.
All right. I'm gonna stop the madness here. You guys are arguing between Will Dissly and Ian Thomas. Let's go on, Austin.
I think we need to make a bet about these 2 tight ends.
Somebody Dissly has 22.
Someone shave their head. Oh man! All right, let's move on to defenses. John.
For the record, Russell Wilson came out and said that Will Dissly reminds him of a young Jason Witten. Not saying, and he also said he's a baller. So I think he's the second option in this offense without Doug Baldwin.
I didn't know he was a baller. Hold on.
That's Russell Wilson's words.
John, tell me about defenses.
I'll give you 2 defenses. At the high end, you've got to look at Minnesota playing at home against Josh Allen and that dreadful Buffalo offense. Buffalo's team total is 12 points. If you can afford it, sure, spend $4,300 on those guys. But hey, if you can't afford it, there's a pretty cheap defense I like a lot this week, and they go by the Dallas Cowboys here. 2,200. I think it's far too cheap against an offense that's relying on Will Dissly to score points.
Ryan, do you agree? You sound like you agree with that Dallas pick.
Yeah,
John is a Dallas fan.
I think you want to look for offensive lines that are in shambles, so Seattle qualifies. If Jadeveon Clowney plays, I think the Texans also qualify. They're sub 3K on DraftKings. The Giants' offensive line was bad, and I believe are going through some injuries right now. I don't have the names of the players on hand at the moment, but did a little reading that they're a little bit disheveled, to say the least.
Yeah. Devin, what do you think? What are your defenses this week?
Well, we have 20 minutes left on the show, don't we?
No, we do not.
Which means
we're actually – I don't understand where you're saying we're bad on time. I have us great on time. But anyway, unless there's some surprise reveal that you're going to save to the end of the show.
Oh, yeah, there's a mystery news section coming up.
Oh, boy. I hope not, because I'm not prepared for it.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just trying
Minnesota at 4,300. I know they're expensive against Buffalo, but I mean, this could be a shutout and 5 turnovers. Realistically, this Minnesota team at home going up against Josh Allen should be a nightmare for the rookie quarterback who doesn't look ready to play. And then I've talked about going cheap in cash, and I do like the Dallas call. The other call that I'm going with is the Arizona Cardinals. I just don't believe in Mitchell Trubisky. He has consistently missed wide open receivers. He's underthrown balls. He's thrown how many interceptions this year? I think 5, something like that. Or I'm sorry, he didn't throw one in week 1, but he's thrown 2. He threw 2 against the Seahawks, much different than 5. So big miss there. But,
it feels like 5.
Yeah, he should have thrown 3 last week. He threw a blind pass to the end zone that there's the corner, and I forget who it was, just dropped it. So I actually like the Cardinals to win this game, and it's probably crazy because we've seen how bad they are, but I think the Bears are coming off of a big win on Monday night and actually have a letdown week going out west.
Right on. Let's talk about those stacks. Upside, stacking these players in the GPPs. Ryan, give me a couple of your favorite stacks.
Yeah, if T.Y. Hilton practices Friday, which is tomorrow, I like Andrew Luck, T.Y. Hilton, and running it back with either Zach Ertz or even Corey Clement if you think that Philly's going to kind of go according to script and be winning the game. Devin really hit on it a lot earlier, but just to really accentuate how much of a funnel defense that Philly defense is they allow 70% of their targets so far this year to wide receivers, and they allow 84% of their yards via the pass. So teams can't run on them. Teams aren't trying to run on them. And then against wide receiver ones, they gave up 10 for 169 to Julio Jones in week 1, 10 for 83 and a touchdown to Mike Evans last week. So that's 20 catches in 2 games to wide receiver ones. And again, we talked earlier, how are they going to move the ball? It's got to be Andrew Luck and it's got to be T.Y. Hilton. So I think 15 targets isn't out of the question. And he's certainly a guy who can break one deep. So that's what you're looking for in GPP. So I'm looking at Luck and Hilton, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be on Luck. So I think that's a good stack.
Right on. Devin, who do you like?
It's going to be chalk, but I think Michael Thomas is just in a position where he is so far above every other receiver at the moment. And it's simply because they don't really have a second option in that offense. They have Alvin Kamara, sure, but Cameron Meredith I believe he's been inactive for the first 2 weeks. I don't see another threat to Thomas, and we've seen it. We've seen it in the first 2 weeks where he's simply unstoppable. He's 28 catches, 269 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So he's averaging 134.5 yards per game. This is a guy who he has the lineage. He's Keyshawn Johnson's nephew, and he's playing like Keyshawn Johnson. So he's a guy that pairing with Drew Brees just makes a ton of sense this week.
Right on. You could maybe even consider that for cash, a cash plus.
I will have it in cash.
Yeah. John.
Well, maybe, but it's hard because I would have to go with a guy like Kamar Aiken, which I'm not afraid to do, especially on DraftKings. It's more of a DraftKings play than it is a FanDuel play.
Gotcha. John, what's a couple of your favorite stacks this week?
I'll give you a stack that I don't think anybody's on, and then maybe a couple receivers just to keep your eye on. Aqib Talib leaving Denver looks to have really affected that defense. They are still strong up front, but it really looks as though losing Talib has created almost a funnel-like defense. Is this one of the ones you have in your article, Ryan?
Sorry, I was on mute. Sure is.
Sorry.
They actually were one of the top 4 in the kind of the criteria that I use, which I was surprised to see given Denver's reputation.
Yeah, so I think with that validation, one of the teams I'm looking at their passing game this week are the Baltimore Ravens. You've got a couple cornerbacks there who are solid, Bradley Roby and Michael Harris. But Chris Harris, excuse me. And Chris Harris has been very good in coverage this year. Bradley Roby has not been. And they haven't played world beaters. We're talking about the Seattle Seahawks and the Oakland Raiders. I would argue that this is probably the best passing team that Denver has seen all season. And so from a personnel perspective, a matchup perspective, I like Michael Crabtree at $5,000 teamed up with Joe Flacco. Both of them are cheap. Both of them will go super low owned. That's the stack I'll give you. In terms of guys – pivot points that you want to look at. I heard a stack I really liked earlier from Devin, Blake Bortles to Keelan Cole. I think you can pivot off of Keelan Cole, though, for the same reasons, and that's to Dante Moncrief, who should get just as much action opposite Malcolm Butler. So if you want to maybe go for a little bit lower ownership, don't be afraid of going to Moncrief. He's seeing quite a few targets as well. And then in that Indianapolis game, to go over to Ryan, if T.Y. Hilton somehow doesn't play, don't be afraid of going and taking a chance on Chester Rogers, who's running about 90% of the snaps out of the slot there in Indianapolis. A lot of people are still hinging on previous years where T.Y. Hilton has been the slot man. It's not this year. He's been on the outside the vast majority of the time. And as Devin pointed out, if they get pressure, they're going to have to dump it off quickly. It's going to be those tight ends. It's going to be the slot man. Chester Rogers, he'll be 1% owned. So if T.Y. is not there, he could get enough volume to really make a difference in your lineup.
If T.Y. is not there, start the Eagles defense.
That could work. That could work. All right, guys. Parting thoughts. Last players you didn't get to mention. Words of wisdom for week 3. Devin, what are your words of wisdom? You got nothing.
I've talked way too much this show.
You had some great insights. You did your homework. You showed up.
I was prepared.
Yeah. You rocked it. Ryan, what do you got?
Well, if John's article is free this week, that's a gift for everybody. So go check that out. It's a good one. I definitely make sure that I read it every Sunday morning whenever I'm kind of finalizing the lineups, just to bounce things off. So also check out Trend Spotting. I'm not shy about shameless self-promotion. I spent a lot of time on it this week because it's really hard. Like between this 2 and 4 weeks, it is. And I guess outside of the article, this is just for everybody in general. It's just hard because now we have some data points, but we, don't necessarily know what to do with them. Right. So some teams are really bad against the pass, but they played opponents who are really good passing the ball. So it's just very difficult to gather, opinions on teams and stances. So just be careful with stats you see and make sure you're really looking into them more. I know, we made fun of Devin for filibustering here, but he had some sound reasons, personnel wise, matchup wise. So you got to think of that kind of stuff, not just looking at the red and green rankings on DraftKings and making your picks based on that. And I don't think anyone that watches this show is necessarily doing that, but it's still worth saying. I guess that's about it for this week. Go UCF.
Yeah, and to reiterate about Trend Spotting, usually comes out on Wednesdays, Ryan, is that right? And then I think that
Thursday morning. I write it
Thursday
Wednesday
morning. That's right. So Thursday mornings, John has his DraftKings GPP article that comes out on Saturdays. He's trying to, save up that information for as late as possible to still be valuable, but have the latest injury information. So be sure to check that out on Saturday. John, what are your parting thoughts?
Not a whole lot. Maybe I'll just shoot a plug for the newest staffer on Footballguys. That's Ryan Zamichelli. Has come on. He's writing some college content for us. He started a new feature called the Sharp Report. What he's doing there is a pretty interesting approach. He's going through some of the high-dollar 50-50 contests and analyzing the sharpest players in the industry, what they're doing, how they're building their rosters, and then discussing their player selection, why they chose their players, doing it retrospectively, but then every week talking about, well, based on what he's learned, he thinks that this given week, this player will be extremely highly owned and in those lineups. And last week he nailed it with Christian McCaffrey, who delivered 3 and 4X respectively on these sites. So it's one worth checking out and see whether or not it fits into your weekly schedule.
Nice. Good recommendation. That's all we have for this week's show. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll be back again next Friday morning with our Week 4 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I am Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.